The Hoop Heads Podcast is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
We have to realize that high performance, it's not a result of what you do every once in a while. It's the cumulative effect of what you do every single day. And that's ultimately what our habits are. They're the things that we do routinely. I saw a Duke University study that said 45% of everything we do in our waking hours is habitual. I mean, that means almost half of everything we do from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed is on autopilot and is on cruise control, and we're doing unconsciously. So clearly we want as many of those habits to be positive and things that move us forward as possible.
Hey Hoopheads, anything is possible this March with our partners and friends at Dr. Dish Basketball. Their Dr. Dish shooting machines are undoubtedly the most advanced and user-friendly machines on the market. Get a huge $2,000 trade-in discount on a new machine in March when you trade in any old Dr. Dish machine. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Visit drdishbasketball.com for details. That's a great deal, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Sean McDonald, boys varsity basketball coach at University School in Cleveland, Ohio. You're listening to the Hoopheads podcast.
If you're looking to improve your coaching, please consider joining the Hoopheads Mentorship Program. We believe that having a mentor is the best way to maximize your potential and become a transformational coach. By matching you up with one of our experienced mentors, you'll develop a one-on-one relationship that will help your coaching, your team, your program, and your mindset. The Hoopheads Mentorship Program delivers mentoring services to basketball coaches at all levels through our team of experienced head coaches. Find out more at hoopheadspod.com or shoot me an email directly, mike@hoopheadspod.com. Follow us on social media at hoopheadspod on Twitter and Instagram, and be sure to check out the Hoopheads Podcast Network for more great basketball content. Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering Hoopheads listeners 15% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code HHP15 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its Playbank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball.
Matching work habits against the elite. I mean, when you think you've done something, you need to do some more. I mean, that's just what it is.
Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads Podcast. It's Mike Linsing here with my co-host Jason Suckle tonight. And we are going to introduce a new, hopefully recurring themed episode tonight where we are going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we have learned and we hope that you, our audience, have learned from listening to the Hoopheads Podcast. So we're just going to kind of wing it and see how this goes, Jay.
But listen, so this is where the best ideas come from, just winging it, Mike. So I'm excited to do this with you. I think we're going to have a good discussion.
I think so. All right, so we picked out 3 lessons that we feel are important things that coaches should have learned or can learn from listening to the coaches and basketball personalities that have been guests on the Hoopheads Pod. And so we're going to throw those 3 categories out there, and then Jason and I are going to discuss them a little bit, talk about maybe some of the personal takeaways that we have, and then we're going to share some clips from past episodes where our coaches are talking about those particular topics. So we're going to start with what I feel like is key takeaway number 1, and I would venture to guess that in some way, shape, or form, this first lesson has been shared by almost every single person.
I'm going to say 100%.
That we've had
like
on.
100%.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
It's got to be. It's got to be.
So the number one lesson that we've taken away from our Hoopheads podcast episodes is the importance of relationships. And when I started thinking about this topic, Jay, what I looked at was I felt like it went in two different directions when we talked to coaches. And so you have, number one, the value of the coach-player relationship. And then number two, you have the value of relationships to a coach when it comes to building a network, which then enables you to have a set of colleagues that you could bounce ideas off of, but also enables you to reach out to people who are part of that network, who you have relationships with, that can then help you when you are in the market for a new job or when you're trying to move up the coaching ladder. Those relationships are super important. So I think what we want to do just briefly is talk a little bit about maybe what we've personally taken away in those two areas. So I don't know if you want me to start.
No, I'll start. I thought of something, and we've talked at length about, and I think both the things that you said were your two things. I actually thought of two different things, Mike. So
okay, great. Well, I can't wait to hear those.
So I think the first thing is, and then this probably comes with culture too, but like building good relationships between teammates and players, and building, I think that comes from the coach to the players, but also like encouraging players to build a good relationship. So I'm thinking of one specific thing that you and I recently were at, and I'm not going to get into too many specifics, but we were commenting about how there was one team that was very actively involved with each other while the other teammates were on the floor, and the other team didn't even look like they were excited to be where they were being. And I think that comes with the relationship between the coach and the players, but also the coach facilitating said relationship between the players. So that was the first thing that I thought of as far as the relationships go. And then kind of piggybacking off what you said about building relationships between, a network, I think that building relationships from the top down to the youth programs and having a kind of thorough relationship tier there is really big. And that's why, we've talked to coaches, and they've often talked about how it's important to have a strong relationship with the youth coaches. And, I know personally the Olmsted Falls coaches, which is where I teach and coach, the youth programs are running a variation of what the high school program is running, because the relationship that the high school coaches developed with the parents running the basketball league during the basketball season, they've got a good relationship, and it took some time. It definitely takes some time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but building that relationship and having those things is really a key foundation for building a good program, I think. So I guess I took that in a different way than you did, Mike, but I think those both ring with this topic in hand.
Absolutely. Those are well said. Let's go back to your first one. I would like to address and talk about both of those because I think they're both worth discussing, and then we can hit mine at the end before we move on to our second lesson. So your first one is player-to-player relationships, and you mentioned how coaches try to facilitate the relationship between teammates, and I think that that's something that a lot of coaches find to be a challenge, right? When you have a connected team, when you see a connected team, you know what that looks like. And you mentioned you and I went to a game recently together, and we saw a team that was clearly connected and another team that it wasn't quite as obvious whether they were or were not connected. And as a coach, that's a challenge when you have players who are deep on your bench who maybe don't get a lot of minutes, to have those players still feel connected and still buy in. We've had several coaches over the course of time talk about that on the pod and some things that you can do to recognize what players who maybe aren't getting to play during the games, but they are providing a valuable role in practice. They're providing energy on the bench. There's other ways that as coaches we can recognize what our players do who maybe aren't contributing as much on the floor on game night. And that's not always easy to do. It's not always easy for kids to accept, But as you mentioned, when you have that player-to-player relationship and when you have the player-to-coach relationship that I talked about, when those two pieces are in place, I think you tend to get a more connected team. And we've had several coaches talk about and discuss that, and you'll hear from some of them when we play the quotes after this little segment. But for sure, those player-to-player relationships are critically important, and I think they're not always easy to facilitate. A coach has to be very intentional about how they go about building those player-to-player relationships. So that's what I would say on that first one that you mentioned. And then the second one is the connection up and down your own staff and throughout your entire program. So the importance of being connected as, again, let's look at it from a high school perspective here. We're talking about a high school varsity coach being connected to their varsity assistant, their JV coach, their freshman coach, their middle school coaches. And then you take that down all the way to the youth level, being connected with their youth basketball organization or their youth basketball coaches, so that those coaches know and understand that you're there to support them, that, as you said, maybe those youth programs are running something similar, or there's some similar terminology, or there's the basics in place of, we're a man-to-man team, that's what we're going to teach, and here's some terms that you can use. Here's a couple simple actions that maybe turn into something that the high school varsity team runs. And I think if you want to, and we've said this numerous times, as if other coaches on the pod, that if you want to have a successful program, and to me, I always differentiate a successful high school program from a successful high school season. I think it's possible to have a program that maybe isn't where it's supposed to be and still have a really good season, just because you have a talented class of kids that comes through, and that just happens sort of organically. Versus, I think if you have a program, that means year in, year out, you're going to be competitive. And the reason why you're competitive year in and year out is because everybody from grade 1 all the way up through grade 12 are connected, and they're all working in the same direction, and there's just a commonality that they share. And we've talked about how getting those kids in the younger ages to aspire to eventually be part of that varsity program, to come to games and to want to be a part of it, that's a huge thing. And it's a lot easier to do if you're connected and you have those relationships.
And to go back again, I keep bringing up where I teach and coach and stuff, but I know like Coach Eaton and Coach Delisio, both Homestead Falls, when they have varsity games, they have the youth programs, they always make it a night where they'll make it a point that third graders are having a night at the games, fourth graders have a night at the games, fifth graders have a night at the games, sixth graders, and they get their names announced and they get to run on the floor. And then, pre-COVID, they were like the two fifth grade teams would play each other at halftime, and they would do that so that they got to play on the floor and the fans would get to watch it. And then at the same point, like they always have a middle school night where the middle school kids come and they get to, they recognize the middle school programs. And I know even Coach Eaton's had middle schoolers sit on the bench. They would sign up and they'd have two middle schoolers that would get to sit on the bench and act as like the managers for the game. So just like those small little things, that once again, it's talking about program building, but at the same time, those relationships of making sure those kids and making them want to aspire to be those girls they're watching or those boys they're watching on the floor at the high school level. So.
And that leads into one of my points, right, where we're talking about player-coach relationships. And one of the things that we've heard said many times is before you can get the most out of your players on the basketball court, they have to know that you love and care about them as people, not just as basketball players. And that comes through building those relationships. And when you talk about a coach going down and knowing a middle school kid's name or knowing a youth basketball player's name, getting those kids to come to games, getting them to sit on the bench, all the things that you just talked about, that's a great way to begin to build those relationships. So as that player who maybe they played on a youth team all through their elementary school years and that varsity coach was there watching them and knows their name. So that's step one. Then you get to step two, they're in the middle school, and those kids, maybe the coach comes down and goes to a middle school practice, attends middle school games. Some of those middle school kids get to come and be in the locker room or sit on the bench, you're developing that relationship. And by the time they get to your program, already you've built a relationship. And then obviously once you have them day to day, where you're seeing them all the time for practice, you're seeing them for games, they're now a part of your high school program. Now you've really developed that type of player-to-player relationship that allows you to then turn around and coach them hard and try to get the most out of them, because they know that you've invested in them, not just in that 5 minutes when they're a basketball player, but you've invested in them over the course of them coming up through your system. And of course, there's different ways of doing that and thinking about it. We're obviously looking at it from a high school perspective, but same thing in college. You build a relationship with the kid as you're recruiting them. Then they get on campus and you're concerned about their academics and you're concerned about their social life, and you're having more discussions with them about more than just X's and O's and watching film and more than the game. It's really getting to know them as a person and caring about their well-being both on and off the floor. And I think that is something that is irreplaceable, and it goes a long way towards building a successful program. And then the last point before we move on to our second lesson is, I think as a coach, you want to build relationships with other coaches. And there's just so many benefits to that, where you think about what the internet has done and made it capable for people to have connections with other coaches all over the country. So if I'm in the state of Ohio and I have a coaching friend who's in California, and I can call that person up when something happens in my games or in my program or in my practices and just bounce those ideas off somebody. So I think there's that collegial respect that you have that you can gain. There's that piece of it. And then I think the second part is, like I said, you build up a network, you get to know people. And as you get to know people, if there's ever an opportunity for you to get a new job, or when you're looking for a new job, or you're looking to move up, that there are people out there that are willing and able to help you because you've invested in those people and relationships. Nobody likes to hear from somebody when the only time they ever hear from is when they want something. And if you're building up a good relationship with other coaches and you're sharing the game and you're talking to them and you're working hard for them and they're working hard for you, then eventually you're going to probably be in a position where when you can help someone, you will, and that's going to happen vice versa. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on those two that I shared before we move on.
No, I think you sound pretty well, and I don't really know that I would add anything to it. So I think, obviously our clips of our coaches might have something in line with that, but I think you did a very good job succinctly stating what you were stating, Mike.
All right, let's go ahead and hear from some of our coaches from past episodes. We'll go ahead and play those clips now, and then we will jump back on with Hoophead's lesson number 2.
The relationships you have with your players are vital. And those kids need to feel like I'm playing for somebody, I'm being recruited by somebody who truly cares about me and who truly loves me. In all my stops along the way, I can honestly tell you, the people who have done that the best have had the best outcomes.
If you haven't built up relational equity with somebody, you have no ask at all. So I think the ability to develop relational equity, and that starts by serving other people. And I think that's a challenge for people is we a lot of times get into relationships to take instead of give. And equity is never built by taking. Equity is always built by giving, and so I think being able to cultivate some relational equity with people is important.
We've got 12 players on our high school varsity team, and I have a stack of 3x5 index cards on my desk, and I've got every kid's name on each one of those cards. And I try to talk to 3 of them a day in my office about something other than basketball.
We do this activity called the appreciation line. So after our last game, win or lose, we bring the kids back and we kind of call it the last practice. And so every kid gets a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever, with every other player and every coach. So it takes maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours as you kind of circle through every single individual. You just get some time with them. For us, we just communicate with them. This is what we appreciate about coaching you and having you on the team. It's really just a chance to get some closure on the season.
a communication circle at the end of every practice. And we literally, I mean, I was at Marquette the other day and heard a great quote. You know, a great practice is defined by how you end it. And I think, you know, there's going to be a lot of emotions in a practice, but I remember early on, practice would end and it just, you know, sometimes we'd end on a bad note and it would trickle into the next day. So no matter where we're at, we've had a good competitive practice or we've ended on kind of a poor note, we end with a communication circle. And what that means is, you know, basketball is now done. Let's circle up. Let's look each other in the eye, and I'll have a thought form every day. And sometimes the thought is very intense, like tell us something we don't know about you, or you know, tell us tell us something about your family, or tell us, you know, what you want to do, you know, when you get out of college. And then some of them are like, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite book? What's your, you know, and then, you know, when there's a great game on, you know, who's winning tonight? Duke, Carolina, you know, and we just kind of do little things like that. So that's one big thing. And we have to look each other in the eye and we have to hold hands while we communicate. So that's every day at the end of practice.
No one will ever be able to say, you don't like my kid, you don't love my kid. I might be hard on them, but I think when you do things outside of the game, because a lot of coaches just put in the time, what practice and games, they don't do things outside the game to show them you're a human being and that you love them and it's not about just about basketball. In our program, we do all kinds of service things and service projects for others. Well, that's all time where we're just being silly and goofing around, and they get to see Coach Hass just messing with them and being one of the guys and, you know, going out on the floor and playing one-on-one and shooting them in their face and talking trash. And all those things right there tell them, hey, Coach likes me.
There can be so much more joy in the process, and these players can not only know that they're going out there to achieve this goal of winning, but they're doing it with someone that they love very much while they're in the process of doing it.
We're able to coach them hard on the court because they know we love them hard off the court.
Getting to know your players is huge. That's a big deal. You have to know them. They have to know that you care about them as a person and not just as a player.
One of our former players was back just for a Sunday because he was off of practice. He drove home an hour and a half from his college, and he came over to the house on Sunday and just hung out for an hour or so. And so, you know, we talk about basketball, we talk about life, we talk about his parents. And that was a situation where he just texted me and said, Coach, I'm home. You mind if I stop by? And so, you know, you're making an impact with kids if they want to come and spend some time with you, and they're only going to be home for about 24 hours.
We've got this awesome thing where we call it JYDP Nation. So the youth program is JYDP, Jaguar Youth Development Program. And we block off the first 3 rows behind the varsity bench, and that's JYDP Nation, and only little kids can sit there.
I love the X's and O's. I love working with kids, the player development, but the rapport that you can build as a coach with kids is something that I still think is my favorite part of coaching.
Ready to feel the excitement of college basketball conference championship week like never before? Turn your team's victory into your own big win with DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers can bet $5 on any team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. It's that simple. If they win, you win. Illinois listeners, we have some big news. Mobile registration is back, and right now you can sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook simply by downloading the app right to your phone. If Sportsbook isn't available in your state yet, you can still join the action with DraftKings Pools. Everyone can play free all March long for a shot at over $250,000 in prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code HoopHeads. Bet $5 on any college hoops team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. If they win, you win with promo code HoopHeads this week at DraftKings Sportsbook. 21 and over. Restrictions apply. See show notes for details. All right, we are back with lesson number 2 from our Hoopheads episodes. And again, we'll hear from some coaches at the end of this segment. But one of the things that we felt was very, very important, and something that a lot of coaches have talked about on the pod, is the importance of intangibles when it comes to evaluating players. And obviously we know that there's a degree of importance on the player's talent, right? You can't play a player at whatever level. It doesn't matter if you're talking about a middle school player, a high school player, a college player, a pro player. If the player doesn't have the talent to play at that level, then everything else becomes irrelevant. But if you have players that are of a similar ilk, or you're trying to put together a winning team of talented players, then the intangibles become very important. And so we've had a number of coaches that have come on and stressed to us some of the things that they feel are really important when it comes to intangibles. And a couple that stood out to me, and then I don't know if you want to share a couple, but a couple that stand out to me when I think about intangibles. One, the number of coaches that have talked about you have to play hard all the time, and being able to compete and play hard, that makes a player stand out immediately. Again, a player with talent who competes and plays hard is something that every coach is looking for. And then I think the second piece of the intangibles that a lot of coaches have talked about is, what does it mean to be a great teammate and a great leader? And when you have players on your team who are great teammates and players on your team who are great leaders, things tend to go much, much better. And I think being a great teammate, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast. I know back when I was writing my blog a long time ago, I wrote a piece about the 12 qualities of a great teammate and kind of what you're looking for. And just like we talked about in lesson number 1 in building relationships, I think being a great teammate is all about developing good relationships with your teammates, where you can push them, you can hold them accountable, you care about their well-being on and off the floor. But I think that intangible piece of being a great teammate is something that all coaches are looking for when it comes to building their team.
Yeah, I agree with both of those. Like I always look at, what kid's working the hardest. And like I've had conversations with coaches in obviously in Olmsted Falls and other districts that, man, that kid is just so good, but he just doesn't work hard. And he could be so much better if he just put the work in. Whether it's at practice, whether it's, during a game, or even if it's outside of practice. And I know, for example, that you and Cal go shooting all the time. Like there are kids that just roll up to the gym for practice and then that's all they do. And I think knowing that a kid works hard is important. And I often, and this combines with like when parents start asking about playing time, and I know that's a hot button issue and we don't really want to dive into that, but like I know recently of a situation where there was some playing time questions being asked, and the coach didn't want to talk about it there, but I know for a fact that one of the things was the kid doesn't work hard in practice. He just kind of goes through things. And I think it's really, really important. You can't measure how hard someone works until you watch someone play. And you can't say, oh, that kid is so good, he should play all the time. But if he doesn't work hard, to me, that just means, it's just not a good thing to have a player like that. Because if they're one of the better players and they don't work hard, then it's going to rub off on the team, on your teammates. And they're going to say, well, why does he get to not work hard, but then gets to play all the time? So I really think that's it. And that kind of goes once again with being a good teammate, like you said. I think those are really, really important. I think the other one, Mike, that I think about as an intangible is like, and this may sound silly and simple, but just like listening to directions. I don't know. I mean, like I've seen many times when I've coached or, talk about like a kid is really, really supremely talented. I call a timeout. I put a play in, or I tell them what I want them to do. And then immediately when they go on the floor, Mike, guess what? They don't even know where they're supposed to be. So I think even though I literally drew it on the board, put like their initials and said, this is you right here, like that's a huge intangible. And that's kind of a going along with life situation, just like straight up listening to people. And you know, I will always remember one of the kids on my team, one of my first year, who literally would look me in the eye and say, "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." And, you know, that kid wasn't the best player, but you know what? I knew they respected me. I knew that they were listening to me. And by God, would they go out there and they would try to do what I asked them to do. Maybe they weren't successful, but they would surely try. And I respected the heck out of that kid. And honestly, probably played that kid more than I should have because they were a good listener and they went and they tried their hardest as opposed to just, oh, I'm going to just do my own thing. Does that make sense, Mike? I think that makes sense, right?
It does. There's two, to me, that goes to the intangible of coachability, right?
Yeah.
But there's two pieces to it. So you can describe the kid who isn't listening. So yeah, you call timeout and the kid's daydreaming or just not paying attention. So you have that type of player. And then conversely, you have the other type of player that maybe isn't as coachable, is the one who willfully ignores your directions, the one who hears you and then willfully does the opposite. I think it's probably easier to deal with the former rather than the latter, but those are two forms of coachability. And obviously you talk to any coach and what are they looking for? You're looking for kids who are competitive. You're looking for kids who are going to work hard, and you're looking for kids who are coachable, because if you're coachable, it allows you to improve. And I think back to a couple different situations and coaches that we've had on the podcast talking about how that the better player that you are, the higher level that you get to, the more you tend to seek out and accept coaching and criticism, because what you're trying to do is get better. Whereas you think about a middle school player, even a lot of high school players, they may not want to hear a coach talk about the flaws in their game because either they're insecure or they just don't understand that where that coach is coming from and why the coach is trying to tell them what they need to do or work on. And they don't recognize it as, hey, this is an opportunity for me to learn and to improve and to get better. And I think lots of coaches that are listening, I'm guessing, are nodding their heads right now, because we've all dealt with players who just, you try to coach them, you try to show them, you try to give them the opportunity to learn and to grow, and they keep kind of looking at you out of the side of their eye like, boy, you don't know what you're talking about. Whereas I think the players who really want to get better, not that they necessarily always enjoy being criticized, because I don't think there's any that kind of thing, but I do think that the best players are happy to accept coaching because ultimately they want to improve their game. And by being coachable, I think that's a really critical intangible that we've heard lots and lots of coaches talk about, is that coachability piece. When you have a team, when you have a player that's coachable, it just makes everything work a lot better. And I think that speaks to all the intangibles that we've just talked about in this little segment.
Yep. I agree, Mike.
All right, let's hear from some of our coaches about player intangibles and how important those are.
There's no doubt that I've become really close friends with a lot of the NBA scouts over the past 10 years because, they're interested in what the player is really like. Very rarely do we talk about the X's and O's or how skilled they are. They can go and see that. But what they're really wanting to know is deep down what kind of player, what kind of person they are. They're going to invest millions and millions of dollars in these young kids. And, they want to make a good investment, obviously. And so they really want to know how, things about the player that maybe don't come to the surface just watching them play. I would say the first question that is asked of me for any of these players is, number one is, do they compete? Do they really compete? Because I think the NBA scouts want to know, how when they get to the next level, can they compete, or are they just out there just kind of going through the motions and not really caring if they win or lose at what they do?
look at the traits, the intangibles, that's below the surface. Their body language, their work ethic, their coachability, and just anything that I can pick out that I think makes them a better player, any of their traits that can enhance their talent. How are they in the locker room? How are they off the court? What kind of grades do they get? I try to peel back as many layers as I can to know more about the player and more about the person, because the character of a player can stop the talent from being good. So I don't neglect any of the on-court character traits or the off-court character traits.
If you put 20 kids in a gym, right, and they're coming to work out for you and they want a college scholarship, first of all, there's going to be, 10 of them that just aren't talented enough. All right. So you kind of, they might not be there. And then you get down to 10 that might be talented enough. And to be honest with you, about 6 to 8 of them aren't going to play hard enough. And then when you watch the game unfold between all 20 players and they go out there, here's a common thing I see. Nobody goes past the force field, which is the 3-point line, unless they're forced to do that. Like everybody thinks they're going to get a college scholarship by coming in and knocking down 5 threes. And I can't tell you how many kids walk out of the gym and they feel like they got a scholarship because they made a few threes. And, they forgot to play hard. They forgot to communicate on defense. They forgot to move the ball. They forgot to run in transition. They forgot to do a whole bunch of things.
I think first and foremost is just academics. You can't stress how important good grades are to the number of choices that you'll have. Obviously, being a great player increases the number of choices that you'll probably have as a recruit. But being an easy acceptance at a school is what makes it a no-brainer for a coach to recruit you.
Is this kid coachable? Is he a leader? Does he respect and appreciate authority? Is he a servant of others? Is he the type of teammate that people want to play with? Is he the type of kid that people want to coach? Does he love the game? Do you have to twist his arm to come into the gym, or is he knocking on the door waiting for you to open it up? So those are the things that people want to know.
First thing, are they high character? If they're high character, okay, how talented are they? Number 2, are they very talented? Are they A, B? We have different rankings for them. And then do they love basketball? Number 3. And if they love basketball, they're willing to kind of what we talked about earlier, be internally motivated. They're willing to watch film. They're that tireless work ethic, core value that we talked about, do stuff outside of what's mandatory, just be gym rats. And if they have all 3 of those, then it's our job to make sure that they're fitting our program.
How are you making the game easier for your teammates? Because I think that question can give every person on your team an answer, whether they're playing the whole game or whether they're not. There's something that you can do during the course of the game or the course of a practice that can make it easier for those around you.
So many people would change places with us in a heartbeat. So respect the game, respect the people that are coaching you, but above all, respect those kids that you are teammates with and be the best teammate you can be.
For our third Hoopheads lesson and our final one for this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the growth mindset that coaches need to have in order to continue to improve and grow as coaches. And we've had a number of guests on the podcast that have talked about the need to constantly be growing, adapting, evolving as a coach. And we've talked to them about their systems of learning. Where do they go when they want to learn more about the game? Are they going to the internet? Are they studying film? Are they watching the NBA? Are they watching college games? Are they watching high school games? Are they talking to a mentor? Are they talking to a colleague? Are they reading books? Are they doing deep dives onto internet YouTube videos? How are they going about learning and continuing to grow? And I think the other thing that we've consistently heard when it comes to growth mindset, and I know that I've shared this in relation to my own coaching career, that oftentimes as young coaches, sometimes we think we know a lot more than what we do. And I know when I finished my college playing career, I thought I was ready to be a coach. I thought I knew most everything that there was to know about the game of basketball. And now as a 52-year-old, I realize that I don't know nearly as much as I thought I did. I'm far less knowledgeable today, or think I'm far less knowledgeable today than I thought I was when I was 23 years old. And so I think having that growth mindset throughout your career, even when you're successful, continuing to look for ways that you can grow and improve, people that you can learn from, going and attending other coaches' practices. We just have consistently heard from coaches that you can't just sit and rely on what you already know today. You have to continue to look forward, look ahead, think about how the game's going to change, and then how you can adapt to better improve your team and your program.
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially, now, I know we've heard a lot of people, especially obviously with having the whole COVID thing, like there was so much time for people to invest in. And I know, like, obviously I like to think that our podcast is doing a little bit of that, like growing coaches, the coaches that listen and our listeners. Like, I think we hope that they take things away. But there's been so many great things that have come out of it, like webinars and, I know that before the pandemic, there was all those things. Like, I know Matt King holds his Arizona coaching thing, and they would always get all the coaches together and have people. I think if you get the opportunity to go to Snow Valley, I learned so much. I pulled so much out of my a week, not even a full week at Snow Valley, that I brought back to our middle school girls program. I think like doing things like that, attending as many camps as you can. You're only going to learn from those things, and you need to be willing to do so. You can't just go like this. This isn't like the 70s and the 80s where you can just coach and things are going to just be the way that they are. They're going to continue to progress, and there's just so many resources out there. And I think whether it's going to conferences, going to camps, reading books, and there's so many books, you can pretty much find a book for everything, Mike. And I know we've had authors on that have shared some great things about growth mindset, and some authors that have shared some other great experiences that I think this is perfect, a perfect time to talk and think about how can we get better, especially now, Mike, because guess what's over? Their seasons. So I think it's really, really important that you go back. I always go back and say I tell my girls at the beginning of the season, what do you want? What do you hope to accomplish in the season? And I don't want it to be wins and losses. I always tell them, you can't put down, I want to win every game. I don't want to lose every game. That's not what I want. What I want is, how do you want to improve as a basketball player? How do you want to improve as a person? And then at the end of the season, we talk about, like, did we reach our goals? What could have we done better? And I do the same thing as a coach. So I really think, there's the small-term goals and the long-term goals, or I should say short-term goals and long-term goals that you have to have as a coach. Obviously, during the season, you have short-term goals, and then after the season's over, and even during the season, you're going to have long-term goals of where you want to be, where you want the program to be, where you want your team to be.
I think coaches really need to, and I'm sure most do, you reflect, right? You reflect after a practice. You reflect after a game. You reflect after a season. And whether you write down those notes in a notebook, whether you type them into your phone, whether you record them, everybody has a different system for how they go back and sort of evaluate what it is that they're doing as a coach, what their team is doing. And you're always looking to add to your toolbox. And I think you talking about Snow Valley and bringing back drills and ideas from there, you think about talking to other coaches, and maybe you throw out a situation and another coach shares, well, here's how I would have handled that particular situation. And then you can add that to your toolbox. And all through time, it's really important that you continue to grow and learn and improve. Because if you're staying still, I can guarantee you that the coaches around you that are in your league, that are in your area, that are in your conference, those coaches are continuing to grow and learn and improve and are looking for ways to be able to do that. And we've mentioned a bunch of them here during this little segment. But it's clear after hearing however many interviews we've done, I don't know, 400 maybe to this point, that the great coaches, the best coaches, the ones who are successful, and again, we can define success however you want, certainly not by strictly wins and losses, but the coaches that are successful tend to win more games than they lose. But all of those coaches are continuing to grow and continuing to learn, continuing to pour into their craft. And by doing that, they're continuing to serve the players that play for them and continuing to serve the game of basketball that everyone who's a part of our Hoopheads family loves. So with that said, we'll hear some clips from our coaches about a growth mindset and continuing to learn throughout your coaching career.
I always tell this story, like the greatest thing, Don Showalter, just a mentor of mine. I'll remember this forever. Here's a guy that's won gold medals, been to the state tournament. But one of my first clinics that he asked me to lead a long time ago when I was a little younger coach, I was leading it and I was nervous and leading other coaches as well. But he was there sitting and kind of taking some notes. And so I go afterwards and, hey, how did I do? Whatnot. I'm like, what are you writing down? And he just said, hey, I was just writing down some little nuggets that you said because I kind of liked how you said it. And for that experience to have a guy that I respect and who knows way more about the game of basketball than I ever will, just to be taking something from what I did, it just showed me that, if someone like that can continually learn all the time, then there's no way that I should ever stop learning or ever stop growing because there's no way I'll ever know it all.
When you don't think you have all the answers, when your ego's not involved in the decision, then all of a sudden you're going to make really good decisions and you're going to grow. But when you think you can learn from somebody, or your ego is jealous of someone else's success and you don't think they know what they're doing, then I think you're going to stop growing. And you've got to be able to develop yourself every single day as a coach, because the players only respect knowledge. And if you're not working on your knowledge to improve it every day, you lose the respect of the players.
Could you go back and tell your younger self something? I'd go say, hey, be yourself. You don't have to act like somebody you're not. And it's okay that you don't know. In fact, embrace the fact that you don't know and admit that you don't know and just get crazy about learning and growing.
I knew I needed to do some self-evaluation and study to figure out how I was going to get better at my particular craft. Because, I had taken all the drills that my high school coach and college coach, and we did all those. But then I started, as the years went by, I was like, wait a minute, there's more to this than just doing the drills. You sit down and you evaluate and you say to yourself, okay, what works, what doesn't work.
Whether it's a quote that you hear, whether it's an article on leadership that you like, whether it's a set player in an offense, write it down and keep it close to you and go through it every now and then, because when you do get a chance to be a head coach, you're not going to be able to just take all that stuff out of your head and say, hey, here's what I want to do. So I think that's a great way to go about it.
I'm continuing to educate myself, and I've never stopped learning. And so I continue to learn and apply even the things that are in the game now on top of what I already knew.
There's two types of coaches, those that are humble and those that are about to be. I think that is so true. And when you think you got it figured out, I think you're in trouble. And just being willing to learn, no matter how far into it you get, that's everything.
All right, so that wraps up our first episode of Hoopheads Lessons. And tonight, Jay, we got 3 of them in, and we heard from some of our previous guests, and hopefully you found some value in this episode. We're going to continue to try to do these on a semi-regular basis and just pull out some of the lessons that we personally have learned and that hopefully you as a member of the Hoopheads audience has learned as well from listening to the episodes and going back and hearing some quotes. Maybe it's an episode that you missed or you didn't hear, you get a chance to hear from a variety of different coaches all in one episode about some of the things that they think are most important and some of the lessons that we've taken away. So thank you for listening. We appreciate it. Please check us out on Twitter and Instagram at HoopheadsPod. Check out the website, hoopheadspod.com, and please subscribe to the podcast. Give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't. And we appreciate you being a part of Hoopheads Nation, and we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Hoopheads Podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.